long as I have, a little less than 40 years now, or about 40.
42.
42, okay. I beat you by a couple. And as some of you know, Ray used to run the Perugia Restaurant for a long time, a very successful enterprise. And after that, he has been involved in all sorts of culinary pursuits, I would call it. And of late, he has been presenting several classes, both at Good Food Store and other places. And I guess this summer he's going to take several people on a boat trip.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Is there a name for it, Ray?
I call it Ray Risho's Ports of Call. Here's the flyer, and we can just leave him in the back, and he can pick one up on your way up.
So you can take a boat trip and enjoy the cuisine as well. So I know we are running late, so I won't take too much more time, but I do want to introduce Chuck Thompson. Chuck will give us the chemistry part of the cuisine. Chuck is a professor of medicinal chemistry in the College of Health Professions. And lately he has also started his own enterprise known as Eteris, where they work on projects that have some future implications in the industry. Chuck has been in Missoula also for a good many years, and so welcome both the speakers, and on with the show.
On with the show.
I'm going to introduce the menu, and then I'm not sure when you have a PowerPoint, right, Chuck?
Yeah.
We haven't really rehearsed any of this, except we talked about what each of us wanted to do, and then we collaborated on the menu. We didn't want to do tricks, but we wanted to just do kind of what people would normally do. I hope this is what you would normally do. And then Chuck will comment on all of the chemistry that's taking place during the process. And so actually, this was quite challenging for me because I've prepared everything in advance, of course, in order for everyone to have a taste, and then I have to demonstrate it besides. And then transporting all these little containers, it's really, you can see there's a pile of little containers over there, and trying to figure out how much I need, and then lining it up and making sure that I've got everything that I'm going to need, because I can't go back to the house, you see. Anyway, if you've looked at your menu, everyone has a menu? No. Not yet? Okay. You're about to get a menu. There's basically 6 courses, and 2 of them are appetizer course. The first is the oven roasted eggplant, and then that'll be followed by the roasted petite peppers with the balsamic glaze. Then we'll have a soup course, which is a traditional Mediterranean lentil soup made with lamb stock. And I'm sure you're going to find that quite unusual and quite tasty. Then we'll have a braised fish with chilies and aromatic spices. This recipe is more indigenous to, I would say, the Red Sea than the Mediterranean, because of the chilies and the way I've prepared the dish. And when I get to that particular dish, then I'll explain more about how it's made and what I feel is what integrates most of the kitchens in the world, the technique that I'm going to use. And then the meat course is, as you can see, is a chicken tagine, and this is a traditional North African dish. I've got a nice big full pan of it in the warmer, and then I will demonstrate. You can see the tagine over here. It's a clay pot from Morocco, and you can actually, you don't have to have a clay pot to make a tagine. You can use an iron pot. It's basically a stew. I've been told, my son went to Morocco for a month, and he said many people now use pressure cookers. So, figure. And then the dessert, something that we served on the river last summer, which are stuffed apricots. This is a traditional Turkish dish. And the thing that integrates all of these dishes is what I refer to as saffron syrup. And that integrates many of these dishes, and you'll see that as we move along with the courses. Okay, so did you want to say anything at this moment, Chuck?
You could either go through one of your dishes, or I could do an introductory 10 minutes on perception and palate.
Why don't you give the intro, and then
That'll
we'll
give you 10 minutes to shake it out.
Yep.
Well, thanks and welcome, everybody. My name is Chuck Thompson, and thanks very much to Russ for my introduction. I'm here to kind of help round out your eating experience this evening with some science that underscores some of the things that you'll be eating tonight. Rather than reduce all these meals to some atomic level questions, I think what I'm going to try and do is bring in my interest in cooking and also with chemistry to show you some of the things that we can learn and make part of the lifelong learning process and make some of these things interesting and actually why they work. So one of the other things I've done tonight is try to dress as close as I could to looking like a Missoula waiter, which means ponytail, peace earring, Western vest, shirt, jeans, and of course, Converse sneakers. So in case you've experienced that in Missoula, you know. So that is indeed because I'm here to help serve with your dinner tonight. One of the things we're going to try and do tonight is introduce you to what we call chemosensory perception. So, and part of the wondrous array of aromatic flavors that Ray has prepared for you this evening, I think one of the things I want to kind of bring up is, well, how do these things happen? I mean, how do we even know to see that something is different? How do we recognize that these things are different? So I'll just break this first down into taste and smell. We have lots of different perceptions, but I like to think of these things as a chemist, and even when I'm cooking in my own kitchen, I think a lot about some of these very, very subtle differences when we think about smell and taste. The chemist reduces those things to two very simple objective categories. We smell vapors, we taste liquids. And that is actually a big difference in the way the molecules that Ray's preparing tonight behave. When you cook in the kitchen, you know there are things rising from the pan, coming out of your oven. Those are typically aromatic, low-boiling chemical compounds. The lower something boils, the more opportunity it has to get into your nose and to innervate those sensory receptors that are in your nose. Likewise, when you chew or grind something, you're going to be breaking it down into its components, but it's typically the liquids that penetrate your tongue. And when those liquids penetrate your tongue, they innervate the receptors and tell you different things about the taste. So some of these things that are important to us, particularly in the crowd that we're teaching tonight with lifelong learning, is that we start out with about 10,000 of these receptors in our tongue, but after age 50, like myself and many of you, they start going down, 8,000, 7,000, and I guess one day you wake up and you've got one receptor and you just hope it's the hottest taco you've ever had. So with that, I'm also going to be littering my talk with a whole bunch of quotes on the bottom, but they're in the handouts with you also, and I've tried to find some real cooking and eating quotes for you. Miss Piggy, of course, has been one of my favorites, and with two daughters, it was a kind of a standalone. But of course, any dish that you can lift, you can eat, and that's been basically her way to think about things. In addition to, of course, smell and taste, we have vision, hearing, and touch. And a lot of us think about this texturally. In Americas, maybe not so much, but certainly in Europe and the Mediterranean areas, you know, the ability for something to crunch, a good baguette, changes your perception of how well something tastes. So when we put all these things together, you look at a beautifully ornate meal mixed with colors. The palette itself is beautiful. It almost makes it more appetizing. Hearing, I mean, anybody who has a dog knows that hearing is essential to food. As soon as they hear a can open or a bag open, they're just racing for the food. We're very Pavlovian in our responses there. So with that, I also wanted to kind of give you what chemists do, which are some food experiments. Whether you have your children or grandchildren around, these are a couple of fun things to do, at least in terms of perception. One of them is you can actually mix foods to simulate other foods. And one of the more famous tricks is if you chop up a cored apple, half a cup of peas, and some brown sugar, when those chemicals mix together, they smell like strawberries, which is a very odd combination to think of, apples and peas. But sure enough, when you mix those two things together, they make up for the essence of strawberries. So if you crush them together, put them in a room, crush up some strawberries, put them in a room, blindfold your grandchild, have them smell both. There's been a few occasions on YouTube where you see a child actually eating the apple and the peas together, thinking or mistaking it for the strawberries. The second thing is the power of our ability to smell. Many of you have probably seen BBC broadcasts talking about how smell is our strongest memory response. We relate to smell more than vision, hearing, any other sensory perception. And sure enough, if you block off the nose and you grate potatoes, apples, and onion to the same texture, and you block off somebody's nose, they have a difficult time discerning the flavors of those three different, very differently tasting things. That's because all three of those food choices are emblematic for something that is volatile, something that is sensed through your nose. So if you shut off those receptors, your taste modules cannot differentiate between those types. So lastly, I want to finish up. What I'm going to try and do tonight is litter, Ray's wonderful dinner, with my little intersections of speaking about science and chemistry in particular. And many of you have kind of seen this picture of the tongue, whether it's in a Scientific American or something like that. And years ago, we believed that the human tongue was split into these regions where you could literally like dab bitter, Angostura bitters, for example, on part of the tongue and enervate it, put salt on different parts. But it turns out that all those experiments were done in rodents. And you know, I appreciate a rodent just like the next person, you know, as long as they're in an alley somewhere. But you know, humans do not have the same tongue as a rodent. So in fact, all of our sensory receptors are scattered throughout the entire tongue. We sense everywhere across the tongue, which is why you'll see the real food experts basically running foods over their entire tongue, and they can differentiate between all those different parts. Also, in the past 10 years, we've discovered another sensory receptor called the umami. And Ray and I had a nice, fun chance to talk about this at Bernice's Bakery. It is the new savory receptor. And you know, I like the word savory in general, so I'm glad we have a receptor for it to tell us what it tastes like. But basically, this came out of our understanding of monosodium glutamate. Remember, there was all this concern with restaurants, particularly Asian restaurants, putting a lot of monosodium glutamate on their foods. For some of us, it leads to migraines and some other problems. Well, it turns out that that is a true receptor in itself. Monosodium glutamate, which is glutamic acid recognition, is one of the kind of key new savory senses that we can add to sweet and salty and bitter and sour. Oh, I went. To the final piece, which I'll come back in the next intersection with Ray as he gets to present his next section. And I'll follow up with the next piece, which is a little section on super tasting, which brings in genetics with our ability to differentiate all these fun foods. So with that, I'll just keep coming in between Ray's dishes and adding a little bit more value with science to each of your pieces of your fun six-course dinner tonight. Thanks.
Okay. So the first,
Let's see if that holds.
the first course that we're going to do is the roasted eggplant. Now, I actually roasted the eggplant ahead of time because we don't have of course, we don't have a roaster here. And you can see in the first instruction in the procedure, it says to pierce the eggplant in several places with the tines of a fork, turning frequently in a hot oven. Cook the eggplant for about 30 minutes or until the interior has softened. And you can see this is pretty well softened. Now, in many recipes that you see for eggplant, first they'll tell you to peel the eggplant and then slice it or chop it up and then put salt all over it. And the French call that dégorger, and then you wring it out and then you dry it, and then you're ready to cook it. And then, in most cases, the recipe will ask you to deep fry it. Now, I don't know about you, but I try not to have many fried foods anymore. In fact, I hardly ever fry. And so I've thought about this, and a way to prepare this dish without having to, I want to have a nice roasted quality to it. Now, some recipes will actually have you fire roast the eggplant so that it gets all crispy and black on the outside. Well, the inside doesn't really have much opportunity to cook, but that's for a different kind of a dish. So what I did was I roasted it in the hot oven, and you can see that it's pretty well cooked. Now, you really have to make sure that you pierce that with a fork. It may explode in your oven if you don't. It's quite compact. And so we want to pierce it with a fork, and then you put it in your pan, and then just start roasting it until, now this was a pretty good sized eggplant, so you can see it's pretty well roasted. Next thing we'll do is open it up, and then I want to just scrape all of the meat, the flesh out of the eggplant. Now we're ready for the next step. Now, a lot of recipes that use this kind of this format, where with this kind of eggplant, they'll tell you to put everything in the food processor and kind of puree it. This dish is a traditional Palestinian or Arab dish. And what I like to do is chop it all personally by hand. Then I can see what the texture is like. And what I do then is I will actually fold in all of the ingredients while I'm making this. And that way I get the texture that I'm looking for and the flavor as well. Now you can see I've got fire roasted diced tomatoes. This is a Muir Glen product that I'm using. And it comes in small cans and big cans. Then I've got roasted garlic. Now, the reason I'm using roasted garlic is because of the pungency of raw garlic. I have the tendency to use whenever I'm using garlic in a salad. Well, first of all, you don't want to use granulated garlic or garlic powder or garlic salt. Those will all leave a bitter aftertaste in your dish. And so the next thing you want to go with is, of course, fresh garlic. Well, you want to try not to use fresh garlic as a spice. So in this case, the fresh garlic is so pungent that it's best to cook it. So if you're making a salad, then what you want to do is roast your garlic, and you can see this is roasted, and then I've mashed it with a little bit of olive oil. It's almost a puree. Can you all see that? Is it up there? Okay. Okay, then the garlic, then a little bit of salt, and then I have what's called Jerusalem spice blend. And that's a 7-spice. This is something that I made. Looking at recipes, I sort of come up with a solution to having to measure every little spice. And so what I've done is I've made this, here it is. I've made this little spice blend, and I did this for my class this winter, and I also did it on the river. It's the first time I've tried this. But this is full of the spice blend. Now, you'll see the words D-A with an accent and then a second A. It's pronounced da'a, and that's an Arabic word. And da'a basically means the house blend. And every household probably will have a version of this. And I gave you actually my recipe for this. It's in the back. So you'll have this. So what I want you to do is I'm going to pass this out, and then just take it and just run it by you, and you're going to be able to pick up lots of different fragrances, because most of these are sweet aromatic spices. There you go. Okay. Then the next one is the spices, then the chilies. Now somebody, I taught a class at the Good Food Store, and they said, what kind of chilies are you using? I said, well, it really depends on your personal palate. Some people really like, lots of heat, like a habanero or a chipiltepin, and some people can't handle it. I like to use Turkish or Syrian chilies because they have a residual, the heat is residual. The peppers are very fruity on the foretaste, and then as you begin to ingest, the heat begins to kick in, but only a little bit. And so that's why I'm partial to that kind of a chili. Then after the chilies, we've got the olive oil, the lemon, and the fresh mint. So here we go. And then I'm going to be smoothing this out and folding all of my products in. Japanese eggplant will be fine, yes. Just about any eggplant will work with this. They're a lot smaller, though. Oh, that's true. Okay, then let's see. I've got a little bit of salt. And then the garlic, the mashed garlic, roasted garlic. Then the spices. And some chilies, and olive oil. This was like these that I'm using I got in a jar, and the only thing that was in the jar was chilies and water. Let's put some olive oil on that. And just a kiss of lemon. Okay, if somebody could bring me this round bowl, the little bowl. And then the eggplant is in the refrigerator. So if you're serving this family style, You can put it on a plate. Then what you want to do is take a finishing oil and drizzle a little bit of oil on top. And then like so. And there it is. And now we'll get to try it. Well, this one here, this is a Mediterranean blend. It's not a fancy oil, but there are dozens of really good quality oils. Some people like the Tuscan oils because they have a real spiciness to them, and of course some oils are rich and fruity and so on and so forth. So a finishing oil, I would say, is an oil that you're not going to just use for cooking. Now, that's the thing about olive oils. It may say extra virgin on it, but it doesn't always mean that it is. You know.
Anything else with it, like a bread or?
Well, traditionally that would be served with a flatbread, like a pita, yeah. And this is part of like an arrangement that the peoples in the Mediterranean call. There are different names for all the cultures. The Arabs would call it a maza plate. The North Africans, mezza, the Greeks, mezzathachia, the French, hors d'oeuvres, the Spanish, tapas, and the Italians, antipasti. So everybody's got a name for a little plates. And one of the nice things about little plates is some cultures you can get 60, 70, 80 little plates. For instance, in Aceh, which is where the tsunami was, its culture is a really an amazing food culture, and I forget the term that they use, but you can sit down at a table and you'll get that many, 50 or 60 plates, little plates, and you take what you want, and then they charge you for what you took. And then I guess the next person gets the plates. I don't know how they do it. I've never been there. But in the Middle East, you'll see on menus, or if you go to homes, there'll be a maza plate. Oftentimes, in Syria, for instance, there'll be a bouquet. It'll look like a bouquet on the table, and it's fresh herbs. And it's all kinds of fresh herbs. And what you do is you take some of that eggplant, you put it in your bread, and then you put some fresh herbs in the bread. And so it's not just a decoration. It's it's basically for consumption. And I'm sure everybody's familiar with antipasto and all the exotic meats that you can get, the cured meats and the aged cheeses. But there's so much more to antipasto than just cheese and meat. And this sort of like a dish like this takes it to the next level where you've got some prepared dishes. Hummus is a very popular one, for instance. Everybody knows what hummus is. And baba ganoush and so on and so forth. How does the poem go? Filful hummus they are neat. Filful is peppers. And hummus, filful hummus they are neat. They are very, very hard to beat. And then in Arabic they say andon, which means they have kibbi and they have krush. Now kibbi is a lamb with bulgur. And then krush is a stomach. So andon kibbi, andon krush. But wait till you taste the baba ganoush. So. Yes.
How long do you let this sit so that the flavors join
To let it sit before you want to. Before serving it? Well, the longer it sits at room temperature, the nicer it's going to taste. You see. So if it sits for an hour or two, it's going to be fine. I forgot to bring a ladle. Can we get a ladle? I forgot some other things too. I'm not going to say. Okay, so next on the courses are the petite peppers. And this is a northern Mediterranean because of the aged balsamic vinegar that I'm going to be using. This is a very simple dish. I've made this for numerous first courses, and it's wonderful. People just love it. Now, what you do when you serve the peppers, you just pick the pepper up by the stem, and then just put it in your mouth and pull the stem out. And you'll see what I'm saying. Now, like I say, this is a very simple dish to prepare. First of all, I want to glaze the peppers with the oil. No, these aren't cooked yet. I'm going to be roasting these. So the next thing I want to do is use my balsamic glaze. Now, let's look at, let's see what page that would be on. Page 2, and there it is. So page 2 has the balsamic vinegar, and I like to use not a really expensive one. I would use an expensive, aged balsamico for finish work, but I would use a cheaper balsamico for this. And then the saffron syrup. And then if you go to page 5, there's the recipe for the saffron syrup. Now, it basically starts off with a simple syrup. Most simple syrups are 1-to-1. This one is much, it's a little less. It's half water to sugar. And then to that, I'm going to add lemon juice, orange blossom water, ground saffron, and ground cardamom. And that is what makes it so versatile. And I've used this particular recipe, like we're going to see it coming up in a lot of different things tonight. You can get that at the Good Food Store. Yep, they just got a big shipment in, and it's I think the brand is called Sadaf, S-A-D-A-F. And I did a class on Wednesday, and I used it, and so I know it's there. I beg your pardon? No, it's in it'll be. I think it'll probably be with the saffron, which is in where the essences are, the bottled essences and things. Yes?
Now you have a milk stirring syrup causes crystallization. Do you want it to crystallize or not?
No, you do not. And so we're adding the lemon juice. Some recipes will actually call for corn syrup as well. The fresh lemon will prevent the syrup from crystallizing. You don't want it to crystallize. And you don't want to stir it. You don't want to put a whip in it or even a spoon. You just want to dissolve it and get it to the viscosity you want. Now, when you're making this kind of a thing, you may, when it's hot, it's going to be extremely viscous. And so once it cools down, then it'll begin to get heavy and thick and syrupy. And you don't want it too syrupy. You see, this is what you want. See how nice and supple that is? And so that's what you're looking for. So that's why we have half cup of water to a cup of sugar. You don't have to cook it a long time, but you want the sugar to fully dissolve. So the next thing I'm going to put on this, you can see I'm coating the peppers with the glaze, and then just a little pepper and some salt. Yes? Somebody asked something? Okay. And then just pop them in the oven, and they're good to go. You want to cook them until they get nice and soft. You don't want them. Once they have gotten soft, if you leave them in too long, then when you pull them out, they're gonna get all wrinkled, but they'll still be fine. So I have the peppers on the top shelf in here, and well, these were in a gas oven I saved all the red ones for you. These were in a gas oven for between 20 and 30 minutes. And so you can see there's a lot of nice liquid in there. And so why don't we proceed to enjoy these. So now the next course is the soup, the Mediterranean lentil soup. You can find this in just about any culture in the Mediterranean, although the flavorings that I'm using tonight are closely akin to Armenian cuisine. And you may say, well, Armenia is way in the Caucasus Mountains, but there happens to be a large community of Armenians in Lebanon. There's a huge community in Syria. And there's an Armenian quarter in the old city of Jerusalem. And that's where I got this recipe from. I've been to Jerusalem, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times. Just to give you an idea, like Syria, I mean, you think Syria, an Arab nation, and I was in Aleppo one summer, and we were on this. Aleppo reminded me of Paris. I mean, it was the spirit of the city. It's not like the old city of Damascus. And we were on this big boulevard, and there in front of me was this huge Armenian cathedral, and then right across the street was a mosque. And so I don't know, like if it wasn't a dictatorship, if you would have that kind of plurality. As you know, for instance, in northern Iraq, that's where most of the Chaldean Christians are, and they're taking a very big hit from radicals. And many of them have had to flee their homes. They've been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And now all of a sudden there's this tension. So, but this is, and the herbs and spices that I'm using are also traditional for the Armenian kitchen. Let's see. Got to make sure I've got it all here. This doesn't go. This goes. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. I think I got it. So I've got oil, onions, carrots, celery, garlic. And now M&M means mashed and minced. It's just an abbreviation. So what you do is you peel your garlic, cut the little stem off, the little bud, and then put it under some film to keep it from spreading all over the place. And then I use a cleaver with a double-sided mallet, one with teeth and one without. And so I'll mash it first, and then I'll turn the mallet over, and then I'll keep mashing it until it's pretty much obliterated, and then I'll pull the film off, and then I'll mince it until it's almost pureed. So that's my garlic. And then I've got the lentils, the herbs and spices, which are in this little container here. Then the saffron tea. Here we go again. Now the saffron tea, as you can see, is it says saffron tea, ½ teaspoon of ground saffron threads, warm water, and sugar. Now you'll notice just down a little ways more is the lemon juice. And so this is what this is here. This is the saffron syrup that I made, okay? A little bit of it, and then I have lemon juice, and I just cut it with some water. Just basically what you've got there. Or if you don't want to have, the additional overlay of the cardamom and the orange blossom water, then you just make it according to what's here. I learned about this from a Tunisian chef, of all things. I was in La Quinta, which is in the Coachella Valley. That's south of Palm Springs. And I was visiting a friend who was a maitre d' at a restaurant. And the chef happened to be Tunisian. And he was a former soccer champ in North Africa, and quite well known, actually. And so I was asking him some questions about how he made, his tagines, and he had this big gallon jar in one of the reach-ins, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "This is my saffron tea." And I said, "What's that?" And that's how I learned about saffron tea, and it's used as a flavoring in many dishes. And so that's the thing about flavorings. Chuck was talking about flavorings, and we're going to go into that, right? About wine and so on? Okay. I won't say a word. Okay, so now, this dish is not your ordinary kind of a soup dish. This is a dish that I kind of use, I use the principle of layering. So I don't sort of like keep stirring it and stirring it and stirring it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the ingredients in layers and then just let it go. And then after an hour and a half to 2 hours, it says here, it's done. And then I'm going to fold it a little bit. So that's basically what I have here. And it's pretty well hot. So this is my iron pot that I'm going to use. And it's nice and warm. First thing I'm going to do is take half of the, can everybody see this, or should I move it over? I'm going to move the pan. Don't move that. Is that better? No, everybody can see inside pretty well? Is that better? There's a little glare there. Okay, I've got some oil in there. Then, as you can see in the recipe, take half of everything that's on there. So half of the and then carrots. Okay, then then the garlic. Then my lentils. These are just brown lentils that I got from the good food store. In the old days, you remember, you just have to pick the rocks out of them and all that stuff, So, okay, so then half the lentils, the herbs and spices, the saffron tea, salt and pepper, and the lemon. I'll just put it all in. And then I want to repeat the process all over again. Well, it's just that I'm not going to stir this. And so why I'm layering it is because I want to have some diffusion of product, you know, of all the ingredients, you know, that when I'm making the dish. So if I put all the carrots on the bottom, or, you know, and so on, then I'm not going to get really a blend of ingredients. And then as it's gradually simmering, it'll start rolling, and it'll begin to turn itself. Let's see, I'll put just a kiss more of this in. Yeah. And let's see, I think that's everything, right? Now, the one thing I forgot was the stock. And so this is just a demo anyway, so you're gonna get lamb stock tonight. But I'm just gonna pour the water in here because I don't want it to burn.
What's the Q here? Is that,
I beg your pardon?
it says 2Q minus 4. Is that where?
Oh, quarts. Q is a quart. And the large T, the uppercase T is tablespoon, and lowercase t is teaspoon, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so that's basically it. So what I'm going to do then is I just want to cover this, and it's good to go. And then I'm not even going to look at it. There's no reason to look at it. Once you've got the liquid in there, it's going to be fine. Of course, you know, you don't want to use a very thin kind of a pot to make this kind of a dish. This iron pot has almost 3/4 of an inch of iron at the bottom, and so it's not going to burn or anything. And again, if you have products that don't mix well, like if you put like rice in here, the rice may settle to the bottom because it'll expand, and then it'll burn. And so I never put rice in a soup. Pulses are okay, but if you're going to use pasta, you know, because many cultures use pasta and rice and noodles in their dishes, and you don't want to put those kinds of ingredients in a soup if the soup is going to hold or go for a long time, because once they have absorbed as much liquid as they can, then they will basically disintegrate into your soup. Makes it cloudy, makes it starchy, so on and so on. Takes all the flavor, you know, it absorbs all the flavor. And so that's why pulses are a different thing, lentils and things like that. So now we're going to taste it. Here we go. So I'll show you how to do this. Could you move that pepper mill? Thank you. Let's see. Bladed knife, but you take your cleaver or a thick bladed knife, and you take the pitch of the bone, which is curved this way now, and you just hit a V into it like so, like that. Then you turn the bone over and take the back of the blade and just tap it, and the bone will crack right in half. So now I've got some bones. Of course, you can use chicken bones. Again, I'm going to take all of my wing bones and leg bones and thigh bones, and I'm going to crack them all the same way. And what I want to do is, if I want to get a rich, dark sauce or stock. I'm going to roast those. I'm going to roast the bones. And I may roast them with some vegetables, carrots, celery, onions, leeks. And then after I've done that, let's say there's some caramelization of fat and ingredients on the pan. I'm going to lift that up with some water. Then I'm going to put it in a pot, and then I'm going to add the water to it. And then you can add what's called, the French call it a bouquet garni, and those are the herbs. So you may take some wilted leek fronds and wrap up some rosemary and bay leaves and thyme, wrap them up thyme with string, and then throw them in, and you're good to go. And then just watch it make this wonderful, luscious thing we call stock. Takes a long time to make it. Not days, but hours and hours. So, any other question about stock? Okay. Oh, it depends on how much fat you put in it. Because if you're going to take the lamb leg, you're going to probably trim some of the fat off of that. Then you can just put that right in your stock. Now, when your stock is completed, then you're going to refrigerate it, and the fat will rise to the top, and then some of the residue, the grit, will settle to the bottom. And then if it becomes fairly gelatinous, you just scrape off the fat, and then pop it out, and then just cut off the grit, and then you've got a nice clear. Or you can filter it a couple of times, depending on the kind of sieve you're using. Okay. What did you think of the soup? Saw how easy that was, huh? See how easy that was? Of course, the stock is really what makes the soup, I think. And of course, again, there's the flavoring. Flavoring. You've got to think in terms of flavoring, and the kinds of flavorings that you use. We're gonna touch on flavorings in a little detail toward the end, but you want to think of in these terms. There's about 1,000 flavorings. You've got vinegars and wines and dried fish and spices and herbs and all these things that I'm using. These are all like flavorings, and it's a minuscule part of the dish, but it makes the big difference. So now my pan is getting warm, and Chuck is gonna.
Oh, good.
So he's going to make a little presentation, and I'm going to have a little glass of white wine.
Yeah. Okay, I'm back. So everybody's enjoying their food. I wanted to kind of touch upon a few more topics. Ray and I discussed a few things that we wanted to bring up in general about gustatorial extravaganzas like this. And some of it had to do a little bit with the idea of palate and taste. But the next thing I wanted to talk about, he and I got off on a little bit of a track of super tasters. And have any of you heard of super tasters before? Many of you have had. Yeah, and it's a kind of an interesting area, but we wonder if chefs of the next century will have to start taking genetics into account when they serve people. And Ray had already made the point earlier that some people really just don't prefer spicy peppers, and some people prefer this or that. Well, it certainly turns out that from the super taster standpoint, Linda Bartoshuk, who was originally at Yale and has now moved to Florida, maybe this happens to all professors when we get on, we start moving to Florida from our other places, is we tend to think about super tasters as being able to perceive far more intensity in our foods. And typically this means a little bit of a move, kind of let's see if my laser's working here. Yeah, there we go, from normal tasting foods and towards the bland. And one of the things that's come up recently is they're starting to test super tasting, of course, in children, because we're being able to find now that there's almost a genetic link with why some kids tend to shy away from things like broccoli and some of the more bitter things. So there actually is a genetic component to that. I'll get to that a little bit in a moment. And for those of you who've heard about it, this may be a little bit of a review. But it turns out that among super tasters, bitterness is the one thing that they are able to feel much more pronounced flavor for. And so the herbs, the many flavors of herbs that are on the bitter side, are certainly picked up a lot more among the super tasters. What you may not have known, because this research has only come out more recently, is that women are more likely to be super tasters than men, at least over a broad spectrum of statistical arrays that they've conducted. Asian and African descent are a little bit more likely to be super tasters than folks from Europe. And it turns out that if you just look at all the tasters, we have about 25% are on the poor group, those that don't really notice much differences. Maybe some of us can handle that really hot chili without really noticing. 50% are kind of right in the middle, kind of like a distribution as you'd expect. And we have this 25% being super tasters. And occasionally they've been sought for some of their skills in being able to differentiate very, very subtle differences between tastes. Now, one of the things I wanted to kind of present to you, maybe a little different from the super tasters, you can do the super taster test at home. And so for experimentalists, and many cooks are, you can actually, well, maybe you just have a friend over you don't like that much. Get out the Q-tips and some blue Easter egg dye and dye their tongue blue all along the front tip. And if you get out a little bit of a magnifying glass, you'll find that the tongue itself stains blue, but the papillae that make up the tongue, the little bumps that come up, are you familiar with, yeah, I guess we're all familiar with the 3-ring binders. And when we used to pull out those sheets, they used to rip on us and we'd put these little circles over to protect or to repair the sheet. That's exactly what you use on the tongue. And then you hold up a magnifying glass and you count the number of little pink spots that appear in that little ring. You can also measure the size, and then you can figure out if you're a super taster or not by counting the number of little pink dots in that little circle. And that will determine if you're a super taster or not. And so if you really want to play a nasty trick on your grandchildren, of course you can dye their tongues all blue, and then you can blame your son-in-law or daughter-in-law for giving the bad gene that makes them picky, which can always be fun. There is a nice website at slashfood.com, Are You a Super Taster? And in fact, they'll even send you a kit with a chemical compound that tests for bitterness, so you can determine not only through a color test, but also through a chemical sensory test that links with bitter herbs. And you really know something has made the mainstream in America when it makes The Simpsons. And in fact, in the most recent edition last year, there's an episode called Father Knows Worst, where I think Bart puts lighter fluid in his mouth, puts his mouth on fire, and then he becomes a super taster. Anyway, so at that point, even Homer finds cafeteria food too spicy, as the joke might go. So among the super tasters, there's probably 2 things that you can also bring up, and that's the scent of capsaicin, which is the active ingredient in spicy peppers. And many of you are familiar with that. You've probably seen things like incredible hot spices, Dave's Insanity sauce, and they're usually measured in the amount of capsaicin that they have. Well, the super tasters, of course, go off the planet when they taste anything like that. And so you probably have friends, family who are particularly sensitive to spicy foods you might make, or if you take them to a Thai restaurant, for example. But they also tend to be a little bit sensitive to things like Listerine mouthwash. They rinse their mouth and it just burns and burns and burns. And sure enough, that's usually your super taster crowd is a little bit more sensitive to that. Not only that, but as Ray was mentioning a little bit earlier with things like herbs, Listerine has things like minty freshness, like spearmint. Well, spearmint is an herb. They mix it with ethanol. The ethanol drags the spearmint into the super taster's tongue even to a greater depth and just drives them crazy. So I think among those issues, we should also bring up the fact that Ray and I were talking a little bit about the importance of fat. Now, fat gets kind of a bad rap. But in reality, if it was not for fat, most of the chemicals that we know in the wide array of herbs would not be transported into the tongue. If you just think about your skin, fortunately, we're waterproof. And with the exception of the Wicked Witch of the West, we all repel water. And your tongue kind of does the same thing. Water will roll off the tongue. Obviously, our tongue lasts, so it doesn't dissolve. Then that means that fat, which repels water, gets into the tongue. So when we think about a culinary art, what we think about typically is that fat will penetrate the tongue because it gets into the tissues. Yeah, basically human beings, we're nothing much more than a bunch of fat. No matter how we look at it, our cell membranes, our tissues, we're all fat. So when we come in contact with fat, there's a saying in chemistry that like dissolves like. And sure enough, fat can penetrate into the tissues. When fat does that, fat takes everything that it dissolves with it, all the nice terpenes and aromas, and brings it into the tongue. So supertasters are sensitive to fat because fat is a solvent and it carries all these things right into the tongue. There's a few other genetic issues related with supertasters that you might not know about. Is that the supertasters really taste the world too strong and don't like alcohol that much, and they've now found the genetic link for the poor tasters tend to have much more alcoholism. Well, if you can handle the alcohol, yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense. You'd be much more on that side. So the question was, could we then eventually think about supertasters going into a restaurant, raising their hand at table for four supertasters here, keep it on the low side. That's coming. That's coming. The second topic I wanted to bring up, since Ray gave me a nice break to maybe cover two things, is he had talked about in some of the wonders of the garlic that he was putting in his dish. And during our discussions, I wanted to talk a little bit about the chemistry of garlic. Garlic is a transcendent kind of spice and a vegetable and everything else you could imagine. Pervades basically all the culinary disciplines, but basically it has just a long history in chemistry as well. And one of the reasons it has a long history has to do with its strong smell. And historically, people thought garlic was of great power because it smelled so well. And I say well now, back then they just said smelled so strong. Some of our great philosophers, the Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Aristophanes, all recommended garlic to kill things like tapeworm. And I don't know how successful they were, but they ate a lot of garlic. And I don't know, but eventually with enough garlic, you'd probably kill anything inside. And of course, many of you know about hanging rows of garlic around your neck to repel vampires. And there's lots of stories about how that works and how it relates to a cooking class. I'm not really sure, but I figure I'd toss this up here, is that many people believe that when they ate a lot of garlic, and you could try this at a campsite, bring one of Ray's nice menu dishes with you, cook with a lot of garlic, and then see if the mosquitoes repel you as opposed to somebody else that's sitting around the camp. If they do, you know that that pervasive smell of garlic that comes through your pores is really repelling the mosquitoes. And some people believe that because mosquitoes suck blood and vampires suck blood, ergo, it makes sense that if you eat a lot of garlic, the vampires won't suck your blood because they'll be repelled. It's kind of an interesting vampire mosquito cooking story, but it means just use more garlic in your cooking. Now, some of the things that Ray was talking about, of course, has to do a little bit with the method of preparation, and he spoke very, very distinctly about roasting his garlic. And among cooks, the way you handle your garlic is an avenue to the properly tasting dish, without doubt. I'll give you some chemical rationale for that tonight, but it is certainly true that you can do things with garlic like steam it and saute it, bake and roast, as Ray mentioned a little bit earlier. You can boil it directly and stew. But actually, it turns out that all four of these methods give you different arrays of chemicals that come out of the garlic. Each method gives you something different. And it's it's almost a wonderful kind of array in a way. So this is the torture part, where I actually show chemistry structures. You're not particularly responsible for knowing any chemistry, but I want to show you how chemists group things. This is kind of our dictionary. And we look at garlic, and we say, wow, there's something really kind of smelly interesting about garlic. But you probably didn't know it's kind of the same class as skunks. And that's one of the things that really interests me as a chemist, is I like to know when I'm cooking with skunk. There probably is a recipe out there for skunk, but let's just stick to what the chemistry parts are. It turns out that garlic has lots of sulfides, a lot of sulfur-containing compounds in garlic. And many of you probably have heard about sulfur. You've probably lit matches from the old days that had that sulfur tip, so you know that sulfur smell right away. You certainly know it in gasoline. When you pick up something at the gas pump, gasoline actually smells minty. I've actually gotten gasoline in my mouth, 2,2,4-trimethylpentane. It tastes minty too. But we put stinky stuff in it, 2-methyl-2-propane-thiol and propane-thiol. These things stink to high heaven to keep people from drinking gas inadvertently. So when you go to the gas tank, I know this is part of cooking because you could potentially drink gas, I guess. But the idea here is if you make gas taste stinky, kids won't inadvertently pick it up. You'll know when you got it on your hands. It's a tracer. But it turns out that humans can detect mercaptans, or sulfur compounds, more sensitively than any other chemical class. And we believe that evolutionarily it's because it kept us from eating decaying meat. That if something started going bad, it would start giving off sulfides and amines. And, well, you know what smelly fish smells like, and smelly carcasses and everything else. So humans can pick up sulfides unbelievably. We have dog-like receptor 4 sulfides. Nothing else, just sulfur compounds. So we love garlic because we're engineered to think about it. Garlic is our love potion for sure. But if you look at, without knowing any chemistry, the structure of these gas additives that stink, the smell of skunk, and then hydrogen sulfide, which comes off of rotten eggs, you kind of get in the idea. This is all kind of smelly stuff when you have a sulfide. But these are kind of small. This looks like a little chicken foot. This has 2 little bonds on it. This is kind of small. But the essence of fresh coffee is also a sulfide, which is another reason why we're so attracted to coffee, is the sulfur group. But it's a little bit bigger molecule, so it reaches our noses with a little more discrimination, gets up there and builds up in that receptor. But I'll now tell you why you shouldn't drink old coffee. Sulfides oxidize very easily. In fact, if you leave coffee sitting around, the sulfur will oxidize just in the air, especially if you keep it warm, like on a hot plate, and that sulfur will oxidize to what's called a sulfonic acid. That's right, the longer you leave coffee out, the more acidic it gets until that becomes a burning-like flavor. So the beautiful aroma of coffee not only goes away, but your coffee truly does get more acidic. And for the people who are real coffee aficionados, you know fresh coffee is the way to go. You don't go back to the pot 2 hours later, well, unless you're really desperate, you want to get away from the boss, in which case then you know that your coffee has gone a little bit bad, and you need lots of cream then to basically undo that taste. So my next couple of slides to go through kind of really quickly have to do with why garlic is so good. It is good for us health-wise and why it's so good chemically. And I'm going to try and give a lead-in to some of the really kind of wonderful. Fortunately, you guys didn't get to hear a lot of the conversation that Ray and I had, but a little bit about the preparation of garlic and the chemistry that underscores it, but really how the chef interprets how something like garlic really works in its aromas. It turns out that garlic is a living thing, really wonderfully living. And in fact, when you handle garlic, I mean, you really have to admire what's going on in there. Garlic actually sits on an enzyme, something really living, and an enzyme is just a little catalytic reaction. That enzyme has to be released, freed from its jail, to start producing the smell of garlic. And in fact, until you break garlic, you know it really doesn't smell like very much. But it's actually when you start making abrasive moves towards the garlic that it starts releasing its smell. But that process is entirely biological. It is the reaction of an enzyme, just like we have enzymes in our body, breaking a molecule, reknitting it back together, and making it something called allicin. And it occurs from something called allene, and there's an enzyme that reacts with that and produces the structure. Now, being a total biochemical process, it means we have to bring these 2 things together. So garlic is really clever. It keeps its enzyme in one compartment, and it keeps the allene in another compartment. So it's only after you slice, crush, or break the garlic that these 2 things can come together and do their little chemical dance. Now, that's part 1, that you have to do something to the garlic to get these 2 things together. So gently crushing or slicing garlic is great. I actually read a Greek recipe while I was out that says you actually, if you take garlic and you co-crush it with salt as an abrasive, like sandpaper, it makes for the best reaction. And you know what? They studied that, and sure enough, the Greeks were right. You get the highest production of garlic smell when you co-abrade it with some salt. Oops, sorry about that. Now, one of the things I wanted to kind of put together here is that this is truly a living process, which means if you take your garlic, crush it quickly, and throw it in your fry pan, you've killed the enzyme. See, enzymes are living things. They like being somewhere between room temperature and body temperature. If you have your oil pan going already, whether it's olive oil or butter or whatever it is, and it's already hot, and you chop up your garlic and you throw it in there, you've lost 90% of your smell, basically of your aroma. What you need to do is let the science take place. Crush your garlic, slice your garlic. There was a scene in Goodfellas where he's slicing his garlic with a razor until it's paper thin. And then what you don't realize is not the slicing with the razor, it's that it's taking so long. In that 15 minutes, the enzyme reaction is complete, and you've totally optimized your reaction to make the allicin, which is the smell that we all love so much. Ray presented something called the roasted garlic. Roasted garlic is one of the most clever adaptations of using this enzyme reaction. You've basically turned your garlic into its own little crock pot. You've captured the enzyme reaction inside the garlic itself, and you've internally disrupted that barrier between the allene and the alicinase to make the enzyme reaction go. So they're actually cooking their flavors like inside, like in its own little floret kind of crock pot, as I mentioned. Now, the other thing about the enzyme is it's totally sensitive to vinegar. If you add vinegar to a garlic, you'll kill the enzyme. It doesn't like low pH, doesn't like acidity. If you overheat it or boil it, you'll also kill the enzyme. So all these things relate to what kind of flavor do you want from your garlic? Wow, I keep advancing this even though I'm... The last thing is, as Ray mentioned, garlic powder has no allinase at all. So the only essence of flavor you're getting from garlic powder is the raw vegetable itself. You might as well be getting a potato and asking us to put some skunk smell in it, because that's about all that's coming out of it. Now, I wanted to also kind of add, and Ray talked to me a little bit about this, is many of you know that the health benefits of garlic are pretty cool. I mean, the cardioprotective benefits are very, very well shown. This is 25 years old now, Scientific American, that they've already shown exactly what's going on. What I wanted to bring up is that chemists made the mistake before cooks. Or I should say, even worse, chemists made a mistake after cooks already showed us we were wrong. So after cooks had shown for hundreds of years how to cook garlic, chemists started to investigate how the cardioprotective effects of garlic worked. We didn't listen at all. We went about our normal extractions. We took the garlic, shook it up with solvents, heated it up, broke it down, shot it on all fancy instruments, and tried to figure out what was going on. It took us 10 years to figure out what was going on until cooks came in and said, well, the only way you get the garlic to behave is gently. Just treat it gently. And sure enough, putting cooking process together with chemistry, they were able to keep the conditions nice and low temperature, and they were able to find ajoine, which ajo is the Spanish word for garlic. So they named it after that, and they found this new drug molecule. Looks a little bit like those other stinky molecules, but mostly this is the one that's responsible for a lot of the anticoagulant and antioxidant properties of garlic itself. Now, the reason why sulfur compounds are antioxidants is, as I showed you with coffee, sulfur sucks oxygen, and it does the same thing inside of a cell. So it protects your cells from getting oxidized just as well as it sucks down oxygen when the coffee is being oxidized. Now, garlic is our friend. So why should garlic put a blood pressure lowering reagent in itself? I mean, what's it going to do? Help its neighboring garlic? I'm really worried about your heart. So the idea here is that garlic actually raises ajoine because it also turns out to be a good antifungal and an antibiotic. So when microorganisms begin to attack the garlic puts out this agent to protect itself from being taken over by a neighboring fungus or by particularly a neighboring bacteria. So with that, I'll pass on the next phase of this to Ray, and I've got a little discussion a little bit about oil and water. We talked about reductions and a few other things related to bringing things together and making other chemical marriages. But for now, we'll pause for
Questions?
Sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
What's the best way to add garlic then to oil and vinegar?
To oil and vinegar. So if you do that, the first thing to do is to generate the chemical compound over that 15 minutes. Because once the chemical compounds are made, the allicin is made, then you don't have to worry about the enzyme anymore. So basically, it's a patience game. If you're patient enough to let that chemical reaction take place with the enzyme, once the chemical is produced, you're good to go.
What was the question?
How do you basically add garlic to vinegar without killing off the enzyme and keeping that wonderful garlic flavor? And this is where that wonderful marriage of chemistry and cooking actually comes together. Is cooks figured it out first, and we had to go back and kind of figure out how to do this. But it is true, a lot of people just take their garlic and just throw it right into oil and vinegar, without kind of waiting for everything to go. And that's why garlic crushers are so important. I mean, actually crushing that gets a lot of action out of the smells. But once the small molecules are made, you're good to go. Yeah?
How long does it take coffee to start to acidify?
So this is another, it depends on the surface area of your cup. If you just have a cup of coffee sitting out, if you cover it, it will probably last quite a long time. If you have a pot sitting on a hot plate, about 45 minutes. and the rate goes up really fast after a while. So I think those big coffee glass pots that are really open on the top, those are probably the worst. Yeah.
How much garlic does one need to eat to have the cardio thing?
So when I was going through this, I read an article about what's called garlic abusers. People have 2 cloves a day in their cooking, tend to get cardioprotective effects. Now, for those of us eating a lot of style food like tonight, that would be no problem, because the question is whether or not those people had the highest yielding kind of garlic, or they were just like normal people just cooking for fun. And I think if you do that, plus you can buy garlic extracts that are already have this cardioprotective effect built in, and you can just take them as vitamins.
So they're as beneficial as fresh garlic?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you put the garlic in your olive oil after you had sliced it and let it carry out its chemistry? And then would it, have that bottle to add to your vinegar when you wanted to make dressing?
You could, but I hear you're never supposed to put raw garlic in olive oil. So as long as it's cooked, I think you're okay. I think actually, I'll have to check on this, but I think actually the garlic actually builds a fungus on it. I think olive oil provides it like a perfect nutrient to make some bad things happen.
So if it were roasted, maybe?
Yeah, so if it's roasted, it's probably the best. And I think if you buy olive oil that's already infused with garlic, I think the garlic is roasted just as Ray had talked about earlier. But I think raw garlic is a no-no on olive oil. Yeah, good.
So the next dish, as you can see, is the braised fish with chilies and aromatic spices. This dish will be a little more complicated, and what we're going to start with is what I refer to as the aromatic vegetable base. You probably wouldn't see this in a recipe, but this is basically what I've surmised, and this is what I feel integrates kitchens from all over the world. The aromatic vegetable base, it does sometimes have a term. For instance, you'll notice at the beginning of Chuck's presentation, he had a slide and it said mirepoix. M-I-R-E-P-O-I-X, mirepoix. And that is the basis of the French aromatic vegetable base. It has many, many uses, but it's ground or pureed carrots, celery, and onions to start with. I remember when I first started cooking on Cape Cod. This was before Cuisinarts and food processors. We had a machine called a buffalo. Does anyone know what a buffalo is? It's really a deadly machine. But it has basically the blade that Cuisinart came out with, the double-edged blade that you put on the hub. But this one was vertical, and so the blade turned like this, and it was in a bowl, and then the bowl rotated, and the blade was under this roof, so you couldn't really. But you could actually reach in there if you were careless enough, because there were no safeties or anything on this machine. And so in the morning we would make our mirepoix, or our sofrito in Italian, and we would throw all of the vegetables and stuff in there, and the prosciutto fat and whatever else we wanted, and it would just grind it up into a puree in seconds or minutes. But that's basically the essence of the aromatic vegetable base. This one here, like I say, is indicative of the Red Sea. You can find these kinds of recipes all over the world. I remember I was reading an Indian cookbook, and the first thing she said, the author said was, well, this is very unique, and it's only I've only found this in northern India. I've never found this anywhere else in the world. I've never found this in the Mediterranean basin. And then she describes how to make this aromatic vegetable base. And she said you start with the onions, and then you add, your medium. And the medium is the fat. And so it could either be clarified butter or some kind of oil. Of course, when you reach a certain point and geographically heading east, you don't get olives anymore. And so that's why you don't see olive oil in many of the Asian and South Asian countries. But now if you look at some of the new Asian cookbooks, they have olive oil in the recipes, because it's a great medium. But at any rate, then she says, you've got to watch this carefully. This is slow cooking. I mean, really slow cooking. If I was doing this at home, it would take me between 2 and 3 hours just to make the aromatic vegetable base. You've got to watch your pan very carefully. So you're slow cooking. And then she says, you can add other ingredients as the onions. What you're doing is you're pulling all the moisture out of the onions. And then once that's happened, then the onions will begin to fry. But you don't want them to get brown. That's another dish. Then once that happens, some recipes will say cook the onions until they're translucent, or cook the onions until they're soft, and so on and so on and so on. That's what we're doing. And if a recipe says take hot oil, put oil in a hot pan, and then put onions in the pan, you're starting with an aromatic vegetable base, because that's what you're doing. And then they'll say cook the onions until they're soft, and so on. And so that's what we're going to do. And then at one point the Indian cook says, and the aroma of onions fills the room. And if I had my notes, I would read something that was written by a matron of Italian cuisine. And she says basically the same thing. And she's making what we call a sofrito. The Indian woman is making something that's called Gina masala buna, I think it is. Is that right? Did I get the pronunciation right? Gina means fried, doesn't it? Yeah. And so anyway, and I found that like making curries, rendongs from South Asia, or sofritos. You can even find a sofrito in the Caribbean. The Greeks refer to this as salsa. I made this dish, a Greek dish, at the Good Food Store for demonstration. It was a fish, but it was the same principle, the same technique. That's what's so amazing about this. But in this case, I dissolved anchovies in the oil to start with, because I wanted to get a nice salty base to the sauce, to the base. And then I started adding ingredients. And there were 3 times as many ingredients in the Greek one. There were olives and capers and lots of herbs and spices and different kinds of spices, so on. So here we're going to start with our oil. And I'll use this oil here. Now I've already marinated the fish. I didn't want to go through that. So here's the fish. You can see it's coated with the ingredients that's described here in the marinade. Now I got a nice hot pan here. I'm going to add a little more. Now I'm going to turn up the heat, because we want this to start. What's that? No, these are the onions. So far, it's just the onions. So now, as you can see, I'm going to be layering this. So I've got the onions, I've got the shredded garlic and ginger, which is right here. Then I have my spice blend. In this case, it's a Yemeni word, Hawaiish. It's very common in Yemen. And I just happened to bring some along. And again, what I want you to do is, did everybody get did you notice how aromatic it was? Now you're going to notice, this is a flavor profile that we're looking at right now. This is quite indicative of what you'll find in the Yemeni highlands, for instance, and also down on the Red Sea. And I've included the recipe, didn't I, in the back? Yeah, it's in the back. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 spices. And oh boy, is it nice. So here we go, it's coming up now.
What else do you use this spice blend with besides your
Well, I think maybe you need to use your imagination. I mean, if you wanted to use this for like chicken, you can make this dish with chicken. It doesn't have to be fish, you know. You could, if you made it looser, you could pour, you can see, I mean, when I pull the pan out, there's a lot of liquid in the pan. You could pour that over rice, some nice steamed basmati rice. They got these special fish restaurants in Yemen. You go in and there's like a table like that, little table right there. And they got all the fish lined up. You go and you pick the fish you want. Of course, they're all on the table. And they just came in. But we don't, as Americans, we don't get to see heads and tails anymore, or even skin. Most of the fish that we get are filleted. But looking at a fish, you can really, it's one of the things I discuss in my class. It's how to, look at the eyes, the gills, the texture of the fish, the touch, the way the skin looks, and so on and so forth. There's all kinds of ways to check the freshness of a fish. And then you pick the fish you want, and then they basically do their magic. And they have an oven called a tandoor. We're familiar with the word tandoori. It's a Pakistani word. And the tandoor is the same apparatus. It's a cylindrical oven. And it's either in the ground or it's upright, but it's a cylindrical oven, and the heat is at the bottom. So this is coming along rather nicely. Next thing I want to add then are the shredded garlic and the ginger. And fold this in. Everybody can see this okay? This is a cast iron. This is, the brand is Lodge, which is a popular iron brand. And I actually got this online. And when I bought it, it was only, in those days, it was only $25. I think the prices had gone up to about $50, but still, it's still a good value. Okay, next, I'm going to add my spices. Now, when you're making this particular kind of a base, you always have to, I got to add a little more oil here. You see now, it's sticking at, beginning to stick at the bottom. Now, if I was making this at home, this wouldn't happen, but I've raised the heat in order to accelerate the dish. So the next thing you want to do is once the onions are soft, once your garlic and ginger have cooked well, then you just make a puddle in here. And that's how I'm going to fry my spices, in this puddle of oil. Everybody can see that puddle of oil for me? See it? Okay. And that's the next thing that's going to go in. And then you can just begin to get the fragrances from that. Then I'm going to fold this in again. Next, the chilies. Fresh chilies. What's that? The bottled chilies. That's what I'm using. They're not easy to find. When I go to Vancouver, BC, I go to the Middle Eastern grocery store and I can find them there. But and then Professor Mahoney, she went to Turkey last year and brought me back. When you go to the Turkish bazaar in Istanbul, all the merchants have shrink wrap machines, and so I told her what to look for, and I gave her some names, and lo and behold, she came back with this package of fresh Turkish chilies. I couldn't believe it. What a nice surprise. Beg your pardon? Well, I mean, we have lots of chilies that are available to us, and like I say, it's really has to do with your palate and how much heat that you can handle. Like the poblanos aren't that hot, and lots of people like to use jalapenos. The cayennes are very hot. The serranos, pack a nice heat, but serranos have a nice fruitiness to them as well. Yeah, I would. Unless you wanted, if you wanted to roast your chilies, and then seed them and peel them, and then mince them fine, that would be a very nice addition to this dish. If you think about it in those terms. The North Africans, I found out that the chili that they use, all the chilies come from the New World, and so the chili that they use is the one we refer to as the guajillo, which you can get in New Mexico. Okay, so I added the saffron tea, and it's drying out a little bit. So now I'm going to add the tomatoes, and I'd like to get some water. Can I get some water? Just rinse this and don't dump it out. Just bring it back with some water in it. Now you can see how thick this is, and you can see it looks like a vegetable base. That's one of the things about liaisons and thickening agents that I often teach, that Americans are familiar with maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5. Thank you, dear. Now I want to add a little water to this just to loosen it. Now you can add as much water as you want, you see, because the water, once you're cooking it, the water will evaporate. and then you get it to the texture that you want. And so this is just beautiful right now. So what was I saying? I lost my train of thought. No, it was, thickening agents. So we're familiar with things like flour and maybe roux, like flour and butter, arrowroot, cornstarch, a few things like that. But there's maybe, I've composed a chart that has maybe 24 different liaisons and thickening agents. Spices, other kinds of grains and flours, potato, rice, different kinds of flours. The Japanese use, besides the Asians, they use a lot of cornstarch, but the Japanese use a product called kuzu powder. We refer to it as kudzu. And it's probably the best of all those little white powders. That's probably the best, fastest acting, and it also imparts, it also enhances the flavor of the food that you're using. The Arabs, the Bedouin, use a product called jamid. And jamid, that's kind of an exotic word, and it's an exotic product because they'll take sheep's milk and they'll ferment it. And then they'll take it and they'll dry it on the tent, and then they'll powder it. And then they'll add some bulgur to it, fine bulgur, and they'll reconstitute it again and make these cakes. And then they'll put the cakes back up on the tent and then dry those. And the national dish of Jordan, which was a Bedouin nation, the national dish of Jordan is called mensaf, and it's made with jamid. And so if you ever run across, one time these people were going on a special mission to Jordan with some wheelchairs, and I gave them a shopping list, and one of the things was jamid. And they brought me back a big bag of jamid. And boy, it's like, chefs love food gifts, you know. How do we spell what? Oh, kuzu. K-U-Z-U, kuzu powder. And we call it kudzu, K-U-D-Z-U, kudzu. Now this is ready to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this dish can be, I actually baked these in the oven. I baked them in the oven. And so for tonight, but you can braise them, and they're very nice when they're braised. And I'm going to move this over so you can see it. Can everybody see the pan okay?
Yes.
So now this is, nobody asked me what kind of fish I was using. This is what's called a true cod, or a Pacific cod. I guess they catch it up around Alaska. And it's a very nice fillet, but they're reasonably priced. They're only like $5 a pound or something. So it's not like halibut. I made this dish with something like this at the Good Food Store, and I used halibut, and it was, of course, it's $14, $15 a pound. And it's worth every penny. I mean, it's just a beautiful fish. But this is a nice white, firm white fish. And I'm going to braise this. Now you can see I have a nice supple sauce there. And the, let's see, I think, I was supposed to add the, garnish it with parsley. Yeah, add the parsley. I should have added the parsley to that. And here's some here.
Was that liquid saffron that you just put in?
Saffron?
The liquid that you just put in?
Oh, the olive oil? Oh, the water. Oh, the water. This was just a little extra water because it was a little dry.
I'm interested that you didn't turn the fish.
No, I didn't turn it. Not yet. So now if you were using a salmon, what you'd want to do is, I would cook it with the flesh down first, and then I would turn it over and cook the skin. But you can see now, look at the beautiful color. Nice looking. It didn't take that long, but I think we're ready to try it. Oh. Ran out of gas. Any questions about that? Yes?
You mentioned that it's cod, right? You said.
It's cod. Yeah, I got it at Costco.
Okay. And is that the same cod as we would have in New England?
No. No, that North Atlantic cod is very different. It's not very different, but it's
It's a different fish.
it's a different fish, yeah.
Pacific cod is almost like rockfish.
Yeah, it's like a rockfish, right.
A rockfish being a striped bass.
Striped bass.
Milder than Atlantic cod.
Striped basses are going to be a lot stronger. You can get farm-raised bass, but they don't taste anything like East Coast bass. You know, they're really bass, and then the next one up from that is the bluefish.
So this
And-
is a nice mild white fish.
It's a mild white fish, yes, very mild. I wouldn't use a dish like sole because sole is a little too delicate. You can use another one you can use, which is a farm fish, is tilapia, which is it's a freshwater fish, but it holds up very well with this kind of braising. And tilapia is I mean that fish has been farmed longer than any other fish in the world, and it's quite successful as a farm fish, and it's pretty tasty, you know, and it's not expensive either. Okay, hand-pick those wines.
Nice job.
And the Muscatelli is quite good. This is from the region of Abruzzi. So it says Montepulciano di Abruzzo. If you've been to Tuscany, you've evidently been to the village of Montepulciano. And you see, this is not from Tuscany. This is from Abruzzi. And this is on the Adriatic, Abruzzi.
Where'd you buy
We got this at the Good Food Store. But many stores carry it. And it's quite reasonable. It's quite reasonable. Isn't it a delicious wine? I learned from a wine broker that if Abruzzi was a country, it would be the third or fourth largest wine producer in the world. That's how much wine comes out of Abruzzi. It's really a beautiful wine. Okay, now this is shall I move on now? We're ready to go for the chicken? This is a traditional Moroccan tagine. Tagine refers not only to the pot, but also to the dish itself. And it's spelled, I've seen it spelled different ways, T-A-J-I-N-E or T-A-G-I-N-E. And these clay pots are quite fragile. You have to treat them very carefully. You can't use angry heat when you use them, or they'll crack. They don't handle extreme temperatures well, and so you don't use angry heat. You use very slow heat. If you're going to use a pot, an iron pot, then that would be nicer. And you can even get I think Le Creuset makes a cast iron base tagine like this, and then they have a ceramic lid. And of course, they're outrageously expensive, but anyway, we're going to do the chicken tagine. And this is a fairly simple dish. I have in here some chicken thighs, which I have marinated in the spices, as you can see. So let's go to page 4. So I've got boneless chickens, and I've got a bowl here. So, in a large bowl, combine the chicken, olive oil, molasses, garlic, first tablespoon of spices, and the chopped tomatoes, and then marinate the chicken. You can get that at the Good Food Store. Okay, I'll put 5 in here. Now I put a little bit of oil and pomegranate on there, and I'm going to put a little bit more. And I'll just pass this around so you can see this. I didn't get this one from the Good Food Store, but they do carry it now. But you can see basically how thick it is. And this is, it's a syrup, but it's a natural product. It's not, there's no sugar added. And it's quite sweet and tart. Okay, then I've got garlic. Here's some garlic. And then the spices. I'm not going to use all of them because I still want to coat the other ingredients. Okay, then it says marinate the chicken for about a half hour. Arrange the chicken in the pan with the remaining ingredients arranged as subsequent layers over the chicken. Okay, I do have room for this one. It's just one more. Okay. Now, it says drizzle olive oil and lemon juice over the chicken along with the spices. Gently pour water into the side of the pan. Oh, wait a minute. I got ahead of myself. Arrange the chicken in the pan, and then the remaining ingredients arranged as subsequent layers over the chicken. So, but the thing that I forgot was the tomatoes. I want to fold the tomatoes with the chicken. So I'm going to take those back out. I knew I was missing something. So here's my chopped tomatoes. Now that looks a little different. Can everybody see that? Okay, now my remaining ingredients. So if you look at the list, I've got the oranges, the chickpeas, the almonds, the currants, and the dried plums. Yeah, it's really more of a syrup than a juice. It's concentrated. Okay, then the dried plums or the prunes. Then I've got some currants. And I'm going to put some oil on here. I'm going to season everything with more spices. Okay, and then, let's see, I want some additional lemon. Yes. Oh, that's different, yeah. Preserved lemons are you can buy, I think you can buy those at the good food store. They used to have them. And I make my own. When I go to California, I like to go when the lemons are ripe, and I'll pick my own. And you want to get thick-skinned lemons because when they brine, when the North Africans brine their lemons, they just use the skin, and it's just brined. So you can find some recipes that have a lot of exotic spices in them, but the basic It's just a brined lemon, and they slit the lemon and they pour the salt in, and then they add fresh lemon juice on top of that, and then they brine them for a month or two, several months, and then it's ready to go.
You're really gonna use the skin, is that what you're using, is the skin?
Yeah, and then when they're ready to, this is the orange blossom water. That gives it additional level of fragrance. Okay, then it's ready to go. So what you want to do is you want to add some water into this pot. And I don't want to wash the spices and all of the stuff off the top. So I'll just pour this around the sides. And I don't need to put a lot of liquid in it. But with a clay pot, the water is apt to evaporate, whereas if you've got a pot with a harder seal, like an iron pot or something, the liquid won't evaporate. And then I'll put the lid on and put it on my stove, and it's ready to go.
You cook it on the stove?
Yeah, I put it on the stovetop. I'll use a diffuser. You all know what a diffuser is, right? That's an iron plate. And the iron plate diffuses the heat, so it doesn't get direct heat. And, oh, you can buy them. Lodge makes them. You know, I have a couple of diffusers that Lodge made. And sometimes, you can even use a griddle, as a diffuser. A griddle will work fine. So are you anxious to taste this? Yes.
When they're cooking in the clay, traditionally, what kind of heat source do they use?
What kind of?
Heat, like
It's very low, slow heat.
wood stove?
I've seen these on wood fires and, with coals and stuff. And so, you can take it to camp with you if you wanted.
A charcoal, clay, I guess there's a brazier or something.
Oh, yeah.
Fits.
It fits, yeah. Yeah.
I carried one of those all the way back after my lap.
Oh, you did? Do you still have it?
My ex-wife did.
Oh. Okay, we're going to try it. Yeah.
Do you soak the bottom in water?
Oh, these were soaked, pre-soaked, yeah. That's to cure it. You soak it and then bake it. I learned about this, by the way, when we opened Perugia in 1995. We opened in September 14th. And October 14th, I closed the restaurant because my sons weren't ready to run it. And my wife and I, Susie, went to Paris. And we were there for just 10 days. And people we were visiting, they were Algerians. And that's where I learned how to cook in the tagine. It was right after we had opened, and I showed them the menu and everything, and they were just very excited for us. And we went to a Moroccan restaurant, and they served us in the tagine, and I said, I gotta have some of those. And I carried 10 of them. I carried 10 on my lap. I lost one. But that fall, I put them on the menu at Perugia as a special. And after that, they were on the menu all the time. Because people just got, were thrilled with them. And then I read this article in Aramco World magazine about this place in California that is where tagines are becoming popular. And this was only a year ago. And so we're way ahead of the curve. And a plum, or a prune, like that, and then a little bit of juice. Whenever I asked him a question, like I say, I had to learn by observation. I would say, well, how much basil do you put in a veal scallopini? And he said, oh, a little bit. Or I'll say, like, how much thyme do we put in the noce di vitello alla bolognese? And he says, a good amount. And those were the two measurements that I got from this guy. And it's not that he didn't want to teach me anything. I shadowed him for a year and a half. Yeah, I was his shadow. And I wrote down everything in my black book. And so by the time he left, and he left right at the peak of the season, I'm not going to say why, I got his job. And the only reason I got it is because I knew the entire menu. But like I say, no recipes had ever been written down, but it was all regional Italian. So I'm partial to the Middle Eastern food because that's where my family is from the Middle East. I grew up with it. And I've traveled more extensively in the Middle East than I have in Europe. And so, yeah, I am.
I heard you say you use a cast iron pot. We don't have a.
Yeah.
Would you use it on top of the stove or in the oven?
I would put it in the oven. See, this one I did in the oven. Yeah, and you can see it came out really well. What do you think of it? It's really, it's really delicious, And you can see how easy it was to make. It's not, the key thing that you want to learn about this kind of cooking, the word is mise en place. It's a French word, mise en place. And a literal translation is everything in its place. Everything in its place. A free translation would be the setup. And this is the mark of a good chef, how well they do their mise en place. If you do good mise en place, your dish is going to probably come out well. So, how about some chemistry?
I think they had a drink. Why not?
Now to do, by the way, you're having the Malbec, right?
Yes.
Now, isn't that a lovely one? Now, Malbecs, as a rule, are only found in Argentina, just so you know. It is a French grape varietal, but the French don't use it as a varietal. They use Malbecs to blend their Bordeaux's. And so the only way you're going to find a varietal Malbec is from Argentina.
So one of the original, I don't know if we want to put this up on YouTube or not. One of the original plans was to actually talk between each course, but certainly that was probably not a good plan in light of the flow of the meal. So I had a few kind of arranged pieces that had to do with some of the parts that Ray has already presented. But I think in retrospect now, it actually might work out better to combine some things. I want to talk a little bit about oil and water, since those are two of the biggest pieces of our carrier molecules that we talk about in cooking. And then I was going to jump maybe to some onions and some other issues with cooking of different dishes. And one of the things I want to kind of present is there any knowledge we can gain from chemistry that helps us with our cooking or understanding what we eat and how these flavors are processed in a gustatorial way. And many of you certainly know just from handling Italian dressing that oil and water will separate. If you have not had a fundamental chemistry class, you might not know actually why they even separate in the first place. But I'll try also to kind of bring in a question of laundry and how laundry plays a role in cooking and oil and water. So let me just kind of tell you a little bit about oil being fat. So we probably all know just from reading commercial press that that's certainly true. Water, of course, is our other essential solvent. Oil usually floats on top because it is a little bit less dense. But if we think about the molecules themselves, fat is a very long, stretched out, accordion-like molecule. And water is very, very small, 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. It almost tends to be charged. And fats tend to be much more neutral. So it's almost like charges repelling neutral, or earth repelling sky almost in a way. But that's the entire menu of flavors are either distributed into fat or oil, as we like to think it, or water. In fact, all of humankind's molecules are split into water-like molecules, molecules that really like to dissolve themselves in water, and then molecules that really like to dissolve themselves in fat. And those are our 2 carriers. Now, I was talking about the tongue a little bit earlier. Yes, it's that fat, it's the oil that brings them through. Someone was talking a little bit about the flavors going down the palate. If you're fortunate enough to get a good dollop of olive oil with a highly spiced dish, that olive oil will what's called train down your throat. It'll slowly bring that spice into the tissues as it goes down your throat. Some people get a reaction to that, but some people love that flavor, that sensation. Some of us like that sensation with really spicy food. And for some of us, it actually clears our sinuses at the same time. But for the most part, that's how molecules are split into those two worlds of oil and water. Now, some of the tricks that Ray has presented tonight in cooking, really not tricks at all so much as they're just real good chefery. And one of the things we're thinking about in terms of Italian dressing is the use of different types of vinegars, and he talked a little bit about using balsamic. Balsamic differs a little bit from vinegar in as much as it's reduced from grape juice, and so it's a little bit more complex. In fact, probably one of the worst things that you can have in your kitchen is just plain old vinegar, just distilled vinegar. All that is acetic acid that chemists buy off the shelf, and we dissolve it in water, and there you have it, vinegar. So it's not really that much of an excitement. But balsamic vinegar is complex. Hundreds of different flavors go into it. Depending on what region you buy your balsamic vinegar from, basically defines its personality. On top of that, balsamic vinegar also has a certain character to it, because some of the leftover traits from the grape also allow it to better emulsify with oils. So even though vinegar is kind of an all-water thing, it loves water, it's completely a water-soluble base, it can actually help things to what's called partition, or go between oil and water quite well because of these leftover proteins. Proteins really help emulsify things. Now that's one of the phenomena in chemistry I'd like to bring across to you, is you have a layer of oil and vinegar that you're going to make up for your Italian dressing, and then you throw a bunch of herbs in it. What you really don't know is you're performing a chemical extraction. Half of the herbs' flavors are going into the water layer, and half are going into the organic or the oil layer. Some scents and aromas really love to be in oil, some love to be in water, but it's the combination of both that lend Italian dressing its perfect kind of combination. And just as Ray done tonight, he's mixed things like balsamic vinegar with certain amounts of oil, but he can tell by eye when the texture is just right. And for many of you, using balsamic vinegar will really help kind of that qualitative feel, or just mixing it until it just looks right. So moving from just the basics of oil and water, I wanted to kind of get into the lipid triple crown. So unfortunately for many of us, what this means is looking at our health report from the physician after a blood draw. So that has good news and bad news to it. So I'd like to put some chemistry behind the blood draw and the interface with chemistry. But before that, I want to introduce you to one last concept. Is this oil and water. You have oil and water when you do your laundry. Unfortunately, all of your laundry is contaminated with oil. Oils from your body, oils from grime, or oil from dirt, and you're mixing it with water. But you have this one kind of clever thing in there, and that's detergent. Detergent is a molecule that's half loves water and half loves oil. So when it intermingles with your cottons and your polyesters, heaven forbid we're still wearing that, but if it's mixing with our polyesters, the oil part of the detergent molecule penetrates the oil part that contaminates your clothes, and the water part of the detergent molecule brings it into the wash of the water that you're using. Detergent molecules are what's called amphiphilic. They like both kinds. Emulsifiers, thickeners, all the things that Ray was talking about tonight are basically nature's way of making detergents. So we're going to go into a little bit, wow, I keep hitting the laser button, but it keeps coming back. So I want to kind of introduce you to some chemistry in as much as just showing you what these things look like, why these things behave the way they do. And it just turns out that oils and waxes are kind of part of the same family. It's how nature puts them together. We have a whole bunch of fats. Now, fat molecules, like I said, are just really long. They're called fatty acids because they have an organic chemistry group on it called a carboxylic acid. And they combine with glycerin. And that's a good thing in a way, because it makes these fat-carrying molecules called triglycerides. That just means is that you have glycerin, which is the part of the word from glyceride, and then these three fatty acids combine to make three branches. It's kind of like a trunk and then three branches coming off the tree. Glycerin is interesting because it's also what we use to make nitroglycerin, both for heart med and for blowing things up. Fortunately, we don't make nitroglycerin in vivo, otherwise we'd have a lot more gas than we have now. So the issue here with nitroglycerin is that there's a different reaction going on, but when lipids combine, they make triglycerides. But very few people know that things like even like waxes are made up of the same family, these lipid families of molecules. They're just really, really long chains, waxes that are being used to make in candles. And if you feel a candle, it kind of feels oily on the surface when you rub it against your hand really hard. And that is a transition of all the different types of organic molecules. And what I want to introduce you to tonight is some of the differences between all the oils, because we read a lot about oils. what are good, what are bad. Tropical oils are now becoming very prominent, particularly in movie theater substitutes. I want to show you why we want to steer away from some and why we want to be interested in others. Why when Ray uses olive oil, it's not only for a purpose, but it's for a natural reason, but it's also for health. So I wanted to show you that there's a property about fatty acids in general. As they get bigger and longer, their melting point goes up. But there's something called unsaturated fats, which we learned a lot about not only in cooking, but in health, but from our physicians as well. Since my wife is a physician, I felt obligated to put this slide in. And it has a lot to do with the fact that when you start putting double bonds in to a molecule, that's when carbon's connected twice. It makes it a little more rigid. So instead of being a big floppy lasso rope type of thing, it rigidifies. It becomes a little bit more like PVC tubing. And in that respect, as you put more double bonds into the molecule, there's 1, 2, 3 here, the melting point actually goes down. That means it's becoming more and more rigid. So the melting point decreases. And these are two behaviors of these single pieces. Now you attach all these pieces onto that glycerin and all kinds of things happen. But let me just kind of give you this table and some of its data. And it's kind of boring to look at tables of data. But I want to kind of show you why physicians are starting to direct you away from certain types of oils in your cooking practice. And why when Ray uses a particular type of olive oil, instinctively we do this for flavor. Secondarily, we do it for health. The animal fats are all made up of a lot of saturated acids, and you hear about that a lot. We have saturated, like beef and pork and everything else. And if you look at butter, we can see this is C10. This is the length of the saturated acid fat that we're talking about, lauric, myristic, and palmitic. So butter has a lot of these saturated kind of fats, and a little bit also on the unsaturated side, but more dominant on the saturated side. Interestingly, if you just take lard, it's a little bit more on the unsaturated side. We hear a lot about lard being bad, but actually compared to butter, it's not a bad choice. I mean, if you had to choose between lard and butter. Okay. Human fat, all right, we're not cooking with that, but just to kind of give you kind of an idea of where we're all standing, has a lot of palmitic acid, so we're a lot of saturated, but we also have a lot of oleic in us on the unsaturated side. And then there's herring oil, which is kind of one of the fish. We kind of crossed over from cattle to humans over to fish. I just want to compare this with the plant oils. Olive oil, if you look at the value on the unsaturated fats, which are the good ones, it's incredible. It's way up there. I mean, proportionally, lots of unsaturated fat, so very, very good. But you're starting to hear a little bit of bad news about tropical oils. And if you look at something like coconut oil, oh my gosh, it's like way weighted on the saturated fat side. I mean, these are numbers derived instrumentally. This is not, an internet site trying to direct you one way or another. This is the chemistry fact behind coconut oil. So not very much on the beneficial side. And coconut gives a really nice flavor. I make some Thai dishes myself. There's nothing like it. But you certainly don't want to drench yourself in coconut oil. It's not even really probably that good idea to use coconut oil on your skin. We'll talk a little bit why in that point a little bit later. Corn oil is actually not too bad, but still has some palmitic. But the palm oil is just incredible. And what I really find interesting about palm oil is that its most close neighbor is human fat. So, I mean, if you think cannibalistic, I mean, the palm oil is probably fine. But for the rest of us, you want to kind of steer away from some of those tropical fats just because they're weighted a little bit wrong on the saturated oil side. Olive oil, like I said, it's just so beautifully weighted. Peanut oils, some of the almond oils are particularly well placed here. Safflower oil also is in the linoleic, so it's a little bit longer chain. So very, very interesting in terms of how the distribution of plant fats and animal fats are different. Do you have a question? Canola is actually on the corn side, but it's very, very close to the corn's properties. Yeah, a lot of people don't like canola for a different reason because it's its melting point. It tends to burn very easily. I'm going to talk very quickly about some of those differences. So you're going to learn a little bit about chemistry tonight. Just some of the differences we want to make sure we go through is that one of the big differences between an oil and a fat is just how it behaves at room temperature. If it's a solid room temperature, we call it a fat. But chemically, there's sometimes not too much of a difference. And what we are going to see distinguishes a lot of oils and fats is that most of the fatty acids are either saturated or unsaturated. That's that double bond, single bond stuff, which I have discussed here, which I don't need you to read so much as you can carry home with some notes. But it is very interesting, and Ray pointed this out to me as we want to think about the complexity of taste. If you took olive oil and what we called distilled it in a laboratory and tasted it, it would be bland and nothing. It would literally taste like fat, like nothing. But olive oil, because of the way it's prepared and pressed, particularly cold pressed, it takes all the other terpenes and flavors and phenols and tartrates and every other small molecule with it. And that complexity is as complex as wines. So when we think about olive oil, it's a basic solvent carrier, but it has all these wonderful tastes associated with it that just come from whoever has done the pressing. Which brings up a great cooking question, which is, do you cook with oil, or do you hear healthily that you cook better with steam to stay away from oils altogether? Well, any chef will certainly espouse that there are many taste differences. I want to get back to one of my original slides about the tongue. If you take carrots, for example, and you just warm them slightly in a nice olive oil or a small amount of butter mixed with olive oil, and you put them into your mouth, you will find a taste that is unlike any carrot you steam and toss in your mouth and hope for the best. So without going into a lot of chemistry, and Ray has prepared carrots millions of times, I'm sure, and he will tell you it is not probably correct to the carrot to steam it and toss it on somebody's plate. There's two things that are going to happen there. One is just the native flavor that you're going to get. But what does the oil and the butter do? Fats and oil do something very interesting. They basically bring the nutritional and taste value of the carrot into the tissues of the tongue. There is no doubt that what the oil is doing is serving as a carrier. It's helping the marriage between your tongue and the food become real. So with a certain amount of oil, and you can judge how much oil you want to use, oil is a carrier of the key flavors. Not only that, I mean, with things like carrots, most of the lipid-soluble vitamins are then brought directly into the tissue and act locally. And you can taste those differences. Certainly, when you steam a carrot, yes, so people will argue that you do nest breakdown, you microwave it, you basically recover everything. Well, that's fine, but we're not moving towards an antiseptic world where we just want to steam everything and toss it in our mouth. If not, then you're getting into the sleeper mode of Woody Allen, and we're just taking pills to eat. So here, for us, we still like oil because it does two things. It prepares the food a particular way, but it serves as a carrier to basically explode the mouth. It's telling you how those flavors are being handled. There's a few things about oil that are worth as a caveat, though, also. Oils do break down, just like oil in your car. Now, even though there are synthetic oils for your car and there are synthetic oils for the kitchen, it is very, very important to understand when Ray's talking about slow cooking, he means it. This is your warning. Slow cooking means slow cooking, particularly in oil. You've seen oil burn in your kitchen. I have kids. I burn like every week. There's some crisis, and I'm running away from the kitchen to take care of something, and sure enough, I'm burning the oil. But I learned a long time ago to throw that oil away. The reason why is that those oils actually not only break down, the same thing that makes an oil good, its unsaturation, that double bond, is the same thing that makes it react with air. The saturated fats don't react with air. So some of these hydrogenated fats, that's why they last so long in the pan, and that's why people recycle them. But the unsaturated ones that are beneficial to you, the same reason that they're beneficial, that they break down in the body, is the same problem that they break down in the fry pan. Adjust your temperature, keep things very mellow, and those oils will last a long time and they won't break down. And the same thing happens with your engine in your car. They break down, they just don't work as well. In fact, in a recent study, they found that some of those really nice oils break down and form something toxic if you burn them too long. So the idea, don't recycle your olive oils in particular or any other unsaturated fat. The main thing is when it burns, it's better to start over again and to stay away from. Some of my graduate work, I actually looked at how high cooking oils can lead to some toxic substances. Another kind of really cool part of Ray's talk has been the onions. He hasn't really emphasized them to their full power. I gave you that opening picture with the mirepoix to show you the importance of onions, but he's added them and layered them in so many kind of fun dishes tonight. And we talked about them a lot in our discussion, and I wanted to bring up onions a little bit because of their sister, the garlic. And there's something unique about the garlic-onion combination that we all love with our Italian food. But nonetheless, there's something chemically related between the two as well that's kind of important. And you'll have this story with you kind of forever. It turns out that onions have the same sulfur-containing compounds in them. Maybe lots of things that grow underground just seem to get a lot of sulfur in them. But it's the same thing that gives onions its health-promoting qualities. This came from garlic as well. In fact, if you we talked a little bit earlier about how much garlic would you really need. Well, if you supplement your diet with onions and cook them properly, you could use less garlic and get away with these combinations. But it turns out that lots of sulfur compounds exist in onions, and they're also cardioprotective. They're also a great source of vitamin C, B6, some chromium, which we need as an essential small-level element, and some of the flavonoid quercetin, which is an anti-cancer agent, and lots of phytonutrients. But I'd like to talk about the sulfur compounds that are really fun with onions, which is, why do they make you cry? And why do you want to steer away from onions that don't make you cry? Okay, I know they make an onion now you can just cut and then, you're absolutely fine. It also turns out that marijuana keeps you from crying. So if you can get your card, you can get that, you can also keep yourself from crying with onions. However, after you talk to Mayor Engen about the possibility of that and get your card, well, then we come back to a different cooking class. But from the preventative standpoint, it's better to think about what type of chemistry goes into making you cry, and maybe we can prevent it without the card. But the same process exists. Slowly slice your onion, chop it, crush it, allow it to stand, and those same chemicals become effluent that are good for a nutritional basis are the same things that make you cry. In fact, the entire health benefit of an onion is based on the materials that make you cry. The more you cry, the healthier you will be. And I'm sure there's some psychologists that would recommend that too, but let's just say it's a chef standpoint for the moment. What really happens is that in the same process that your onion is making these nice anti-cancer, antioxidant materials, it's also making something called thiopropanol sulfoxide. It's a really tiny little molecule, but there's a nice premise in chemistry. The smaller the molecule, the more volatile it is. Just think about things like gas, hydrogen sulfide, and methane. They're all gases. This guy's small also. But it turns out that when the onion makes this, and this gets into the water of your eye, this thiopropanol sulfoxide, again, just like that coffee example, it turns into an acid. So in your eye, as it gets into the water of your eye, it's converting into an acid slowly. And the more you build up, the more your eye is getting acidic, and our eyes don't like that. Our eyes like to be perfectly neutral. We don't like any acid. We don't like any base. If you've ever got lemon juice in your eye, that's basically the same sensation. Grapefruit juice, it's the same sensation, too much acidity. Now, the interesting thing about onions, of course, is that this molecule is relatively unstable. So even in the air, when you're cooking in your kitchen, the first cut of the onion, 5 minutes later, it's kind of dissipated from the kitchen. But you want to kind of do the same thing. You want to cut it, let it hang out for about 15 minutes. Some cooks have gone to cutting their onion, putting it in Tupperware, putting it in the refrigerator, and letting it hang out there for a couple of hours, because you can slow the process down and then pop the lid on the Tupperware out on the deck. And then you get all the nutritional value, and then you just dump it into your fry pan. So that's a nice little cooking variation. So that's kind of one of the things I've talked about here. And the same problem with onions. So if you cut them and toss them into your fry pan too quickly, you lose all that nutritional value because you kill that enzyme that's responsible for getting this thing to work. So we also found that researchers that started to look at the use of onions in inhibiting cancer pathways is that, again, we had to learn from cooks, is that by allowing the enzyme to produce these small molecules, the anti-cancer properties were elevated over time. If you cook them too fast or chopped them or threw them into boiling water, that's a problem. It is interesting, if you chop an onion and you put it into tomato sauce, you also kill the onion in terms of its ability. You probably know this. If you've ever put aluminum foil on top of spaghetti sauce and let it come in contact, you say to yourself, how did I burn a hole in my aluminum foil? That's how acidic tomato sauce is. So of course, when you put something living in there like an enzyme, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like you're going into a volcano as far as the enzyme is concerned. It's just going to just burn up in there. So the idea is to keep your onion kind of safe. And like I said, think of your onion and garlic kind of as a Polaroid. Just let it develop for a little while and everything will be great. I was going to either go into wine or let you wrap up.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm on a roll. So wine. We've had enough and we've still got more. So I don't know. This is a good time to talk a few things about wine. in terms of the overall dinner, one of the things you've been getting are tones and notes and hints, but probably not realizing that you've got basically an entire dictionary of small molecules coming into your mouth and and your brain is trying to decipher all that's going on. Probably nowhere is that more complex, and Ray and I talked about this, than it is in the case of wine. Wine is an incredible substance. Not because I like it so much, but because it really is an incredible concoction. Just pure serendipity. Andy Waterhouse, who is now the head of enology at the University of California, Davis, was my lab partner at UC Berkeley. I didn't even know he was involved in wine. He and I were working on that project to discover cancer-causing agents in foods back in Berkeley in '82. And I look him up about a month ago, and there he is. He's like the head of the enology department, and he published all these cool graphs. And it's like, I got to give this guy a call. Anyway, so he was cool then, and he's kind of cool now. Actually, he's even more cool now because I can get some hints on wine. But if we look at the composition of wine, he's posted these graphs up on his website. So I want to give all the credit to Andy Waterhouse at UC Davis. He's done these nice interactive graphs to show you basically how much wine is water, which you probably predicted. A good chunk of alcohol, up to a good percentage. And then there's this little pie piece of everything else. If you take that little pie piece and then blow it up, you can make another pie chart of all the little things that wine is made out of. And even among this pie chart, there's only 3 sections that constitute most of the taste. That's the phenols, the esters, and the higher alcohols. It's kind of amazing. So Ray and I had this discussion. It's like less than 0.5% of all the constituents in wine lead to its flavor. Now that in alone, well, there's also these questions of things like sulfates and some other types of sugars. Glycerol, that same thing that was in there to make triglycerides. Glycerol seems to be ubiquitous in nature. There's lots of regular sugar. There's some volatile acidity, which is a measurement of wines in themselves. Acetaldehyde, the remainder which can give you a little bit of a hangover. There's also essential amino acids in there. But just those 3 little categories play such a role in the flavor that if we think about wine's flavor, it is almost completely subjective. And there's 2 things that are driving that. It's the complexity of the wine itself, since there are 500 or so individual flavors in a wine. But then there's the poor, medium, and super taster among us. So not only do we perceive wines differently, we truly do taste them differently. And I may be the type of person that goes in, I can't tell the difference between a Shiraz and a Zinfandel and a Pinot. I'm hoping I can tell the difference between a Chardonnay and a Zinfandel. But among those subtle tastes, some of you can pick out those flavors and those notes so incredibly well. And that might be 1 out of 10 of us in this room. But for the rest of us, as Professor Hyman also at UC Davis says, is that the flavors that really linger on the palate, those few remaining notes, are mostly those small little category called esters. And those are the fruity flavors. We tend to smell things like blackberry and sometimes some prune and sometimes some taller notes that come off of the wines. And those are from esters mostly. And those are kind of carboxylic acids that have been blocked and a little bit more, kind of more pleasant. We also get astringent flavors out of wine, and those come from what's called tannins and phenols. These are mild acids, and that's what kind of leaves a little bit of that kind of, it feels like your tongue might be tightening up kind of flavor. So if you've ever had a really tough, cheap red wine, like back alley next to the refrigerator box on Route 90 kind of wine, then you probably have tasted something that has an overly astringent flavor. The sweetness of the notes also, of course, come from some of the sugars. But the bottom line that we really figured out from reading some of these interesting elements of enology, particularly in terms of taste and our palate, is that if you think about Merlot being different from something subtle like a Pinot, there are 500 molecules that comprise both of those individual tastes. You could make a table of both of them, and you'd find about, what would they say, over 90% homology. 90% of those molecules in the left column for the Pinot would match 90% of the molecules on the right for the Merlot. But they vary by 1% or 2%, and then there's maybe 10 or 15 molecules that might be different altogether. But you could not use an instrument to say that Merlot is different than that Pinot. But there are humans that could pick them apart as if they were differentiating between a cheap slice of American cheddar and the most wonderful gorgonzola. I mean, they are just able to pick those things apart largely on the small molecules of notes. And that's what I put down here a little bit on the tasters and super tasters, is that there are now super tasters who can obviate the irritation that they get from the alcohol, and they can pick up some of those notes of difference. So I was going to skip over liaisons, and then we had your last dessert dish, and we were good to go.
Apricots. Now these,
He said he wanted to finish by 9, so. Oh, thanks.
they may look like fresh apricots, but actually they're reconstituted. And if I had been able to leave them in for an extra
Is this the
day,
same one?
it would be like this.
How long?
Is this the same one?
These were
Same
these were
wine
done,
that you had. No, it's the Malbec.
Oh, you're supposed to say, who cares?
It doesn't matter. We won't be able to
Yeah,
tell the difference.
exactly.
So,
That's what I was just trying to say.
so that,
Wines are as complex as
I think Chuck was gonna talk about reconstituting, and what I wanna do, what's that?
I don't think we'll have time, so
Oh, okay. In another class. We're running a little late. Anyway, what I'm going to do is we're going to pass these out so you can try them. But this is a very simple dish, as you can see. Okay, first you've got the apricots in the water. And so we're basically reconstituting the apricot. Then you make your filling. So the filling is ricotta cheese, or if you wanted to use strained yogurt, you could, and it's highly concentrated. It's almost like a cheese, or clotted cream. Then you use more saffron syrup, this goodness here, and then ground blanched almonds. Now you can actually buy this stuff in the good food store, and I think you can get it at Patty Creek Market and some other places, and it's almond, like an almond flour, and it's perfect for this dish because it's already ground for you. It's just like a flour. So what we want to do now, it says ingredients: pasteurized whey and milk, vinegar and salt. And that's basically the kind of ricotta that you want to use. So we take our ricotta, just put it in, and then the almonds. Then I'm going to start folding it and whipping it up. And what I want to do is I've got here, for instance, I've got a cup of ricotta, a tablespoon of syrup, and a quarter of a cup of blanched almonds. And when I made this at the house, I let my wife taste it, and she said, it's not sweet enough. So I added more of the good stuff. And that's basically what you have to do. Chuck was talking about how, I would eyeball things, and that's basically what I've taught all the people that all my proteges and people that I've taught in the kitchen, that cooking is extremely tactile. And the last thing on your agenda should be to taste. You need to look and see what your texture's like, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it looks like, and then you're ready to go. And so here's my filling, nice and smooth, and it's very nice. So the next thing that I want to do now is to put this in my pastry bag. This is the pastry bag. Then I have some, these have not been filled. And then the thing is, you have to decide how sweet you want your apricots. We did these, like I say, on the river. And, you know, we had 5 dinners and 5, you know, it was multi-course and then 5 desserts. And this was probably the hit. And it was probably the simplest of all the ones that we made. So all you have to do then is just put it in and it's way to go. It's not that complicated. Then the last thing we did was to take these here that we have in the pan, and I put a little kiss of syrup on each one. And we can serve these now. And I'm going to put a little bit more, I'm going to drizzle a little bit more syrup on these.